Hello and welcome to the 10 things real estate agents need to know about middle housing and ADUs with Denise Lonis. I'm your host, Lonis Group CEO Shauna Nath. Middle housing is radically going to change real estate as we know it. Within cities, most residential sales are no longer just residential sales. We're going to be seeing more ADUs, certainly ADU potential, and duplexes up to fourplexes, townhomes, cottages, and the potential for these to be built on a single residential lot is going to change the way that we value property, market property, and assess our buyer pool. Right now, there's an opportunity for agents who are in the know to have market advantage, and there's a huge learning curve for agents needed to stay out of legal hot water. Today, Denise is going to provide you with an overview of how middle housing is going to impact our market, but it's really only going to scratch the surface. We will talk about the tools and resources at the end of our time today for you to learn more, so be sure to tune in for the entire session. Denise is on the legislative committee for the Building Industry Association, so she has been on the forefront of seeing how these changes have come together and is excited to talk with you about these today. And without further ado, I'd like to turn things over to Denise.
Well, this is a very, very timely topic because it does not matter where you go nowadays. People are talking about ADUs, middle housing, DADUs, duplexes, triplexes, and I want to explain based on the law what these changes mean, where they apply, how they apply, and what you as a real estate professional need to know because these new laws change everything about the way you even value property. And in order to stay out of legal hot water, you have to be able to walk onto someone's property and understand what the new rules and regulations mean to that particular property and for that particular owner and for that particular situation. So this is a really, really incredible moment. And I always like to talk about those moments in the market where you can either choose to embrace what's happening and learn about it and bring it into your business and actually use it as an opportunity to be a specialist or use it as an opportunity to really build your confidence. So when you sit down and talk with the seller, you know what you're talking about, you know the laws, you understand the laws. And if you don't, sellers will know right away. Because if a seller knows that their property maybe has the potential for adding a DADU or an ADU, they've already done some research. So if you don't know more than they know, they're not going to hire you. So this is a really important moment in the market. And do you remember, I always like to go back in time and look at what other moments have there been. Remember the moment where we had the short sales? Remember everybody was scrambling to learn that? Well, here's the difference. Short sales only occur in a market like we had then. Short sales don't occur in a rapidly inclining medium price point market. They don't because you've got the equity there. But in a rapidly declining market, you can have short sales. We don't have that situation. With ADUs and DADUs and middle housing laws, they're here to stay now because they have now been voted in and passed into law. So it's something that you're going to have to learn. And what, like I always say, to be at the forefront and to be one of the first adopters is always the best way to go. So remember the first time home buyer tax credit? Okay, remember that moment in time? Do you remember when interest rates were at 2.78%? One thing we know that's true about real estate is that real estate always presents moments in the market where it's a benefit to someone. And right now, the moment in the market and the way that middle housing is being treated with its pro-development, pro-building, it's the moment right now. And you've got sellers out there that are also sitting on properties that are potentially little gold mines. And that's why it's so important for you to be able to identify how big is that gold nugget? How pure is that gold nugget? What can we do with it? So that's going to be really important. So this right now is a moment of huge opportunity. Okay, so people ask all the time, what actually is middle housing? So we actually have had middle housing. We've had it back since the early 1900s. We're going to talk a little bit more about that later, but middle housing, the categories of the types of product that classify in the middle housing realm would be ADUs, townhouses, duplexes up to sixplexes, stacked flats, garden apartments, cottages. So it's really important that you understand, okay, what are the differences between these? Because something as simple as a cottage has its own definition, and there needs to be certain things that go with those cottages to actually define them that way. So we're going to talk a little bit more about this as we go through this. So middle housing is really the creation of and looking for opportunities to add more density to our lots. That's really what middle housing is. Now, if you were to take a snapshot of a neighborhood near you, okay, and you were to just do like take an overhead snapshot, you would be able to see that there are many lots where there are lots of opportunities to do things. So, for example, you could have a lot that where the house is built fairly close to the front, and at the back, there's a whole bunch of space back there where you could build a small ADU. That lot could be completely scrapped, that house could be removed, and you could build something completely new. Also, with condoization, which we're going to talk about a little bit later, there's even more opportunities. So it's really the goal is to achieve greater housing density. And it's done by eliminating setbacks. And that's why these new laws allow for that. So your local planning departments, they all have been given a date and a mandate to go out and find more opportunities for housing. Now, do you remember if you go back in time and you look at some of the older neighborhoods, and you just tour around those neighborhoods and you have a look, even before the 1950s, you might have seen duplexes and triplexes, fourplexes, and even these small little apartment buildings that were tucked in. And that's really what middle housing is. It's more density per lot. And in fact, what happened was we did so much in terms of middle housing way back then, but then we started to build the suburbs. And then everybody was moving out in the suburbs, and then the laws changed. And now we're really getting back to just adding greater opportunities for additional types of housing and additional densities of housing. Now, today I want to talk about 10 things that you really need to know and 10 things that are going to help you in your business. And I will tell you that I have spent hundreds, maybe even thousands of hours learning everything I can about middle housing. I am on the local level, state level, national level, everything to do with government affairs, legislative affairs. And I do this so that I'm aware of what's coming down the pike, and including sitting at city council meetings in person, on Zoom meetings, getting the transcripts after. What I'm looking for is any area where middle housing is even talked about. And let me tell you, middle housing is everywhere. So middle housing is coming, and in some places it's already been here. Now, the Washington State Department of Commerce, if you look at their map, you're going to notice that things are color coded, and the color codes represent the different deadlines that each county has in order and under the Growth Management Act to get their middle housing and ADU laws incorporated, right? So they've got up to 6 months after the comprehensive plan due date. So let's imagine, for example, if we go to any of the counties like Snohomish, King, and Pierce County, theirs was due in 6 months after December 31st, 2024. So let me tell you, it's not just those counties. All these other counties where I live up in Whatcom County, ours is due December 31st of 2025, and then each city and county, including my area, has 6 months after that due date. And I will tell you that the county meetings and the state meetings that I have had the opportunity to sit in on, this has been talked about for a number of years. These counties have known this is coming. These little city planning departments have known they're coming, and many are well ahead of the game already. So there is just so much that's already out there that you can utilize, but there's things that are going to be super important to you as an agent. You need to understand how to price these properties. You need to understand how the values change depending on the lot configuration, depending on the area, depending on what you can do there. So you're going to get your guidelines from where you specifically work. So what does this mean to you? Like, how do you find out all about this? So first of all, any city council meetings and county council meetings will have agendas. They will have minutes after the meetings. You can access this. You just have to go digging for it. You can find it. Also, you can meet with your local building and permit department, and you can find out from them what's happened in my area already. What are the requirements in our area? Also, follow the city and the county social media accounts because anything new, anything updated, anything changed, anything altered, they will have it there. I also have signed up for email notifications from many different cities and counties because I get email notifications ahead of time. So also search on Google, and we've done a lot of research already for you. So I'll share with you as much as I can today. And then we will also be talking a little bit about some additional training that's available. So number 9, bill details. So what do House Bill 1110 and House Bill 1333 actually allow to build for? So where can you build? What can you build? What type of product? What are the restrictions? What are the requirements? What are the needs? There's a lot to this because in essence, it's not like you're always just building. So for example, if you're going to add a DADU to a backyard, you're not just dealing with a blank canvas. You're dealing with a canvas that may have some issues on it. There might be a house there and you're adding a DADU. There might be a tree there. And does your area have any tree canopy or tree regulations? If so, what are there? What are they? So House Bill 1110, depending on a city's population, allows for duplexes up to sixplexes on each individual residential lot. Again, note it applies to properties within the city limits. Now, there will be restrictions that apply. So you really have to understand what are those restrictions. Now, House Bill 1110 has also been termed or called the Middle Housing Bill, okay? Whereas House Bill 1337, which we're going to talk about, is really the ADU bill. So House Bill 1337 allows for 2 ADUs or DADUs to be added to each residential lot. And this applies to properties that are within the UGA. But again, there are restrictions. These restrictions are in some areas more lenient, in some areas more stringent. So you're going to have to know what those are. That's super important. Now, I know that many of you are probably thinking, my buyers and sellers are just regular buyers and sellers. Why do I need to know this? Well, let me give you an example. There are buyers out there right now that potentially, perhaps, can't qualify on their own to buy a property in the area that, for example, that you work. But if they were to buy a property that had an ADU, that was a legal ADU, that was a permitted ADU, and that it was rented out, could you potentially use that income? Okay, these are the things you need to understand because while you think you're just working with regular buyers and sellers, both of these house bills allow you to be way more creative in the solutions that you have for your clients. This is extremely important because I know in some areas where ADUs have been very popular for a long time, it really opens things up for buyers. Also for sellers that have properties where maybe they have an ADU that's already been built on it, for example, but let's imagine it's called an ADU because it was built 20 years ago. But maybe if they were to take that existing ADU and they were to renovate it, upgrade it, get it to today's code, get it under the new laws, then they could change that and convert that into a legal ADU that could it then be rented out. I mean, there's so many possibilities. The other thing, people will say, okay, why is this so important? And it's so important because when you think about ADUs, DADUs, all these alternative housing types, what it does is it opens up the pool for buyers and it opens up the opportunity for sellers. So you need to know this because you're going to have buyers that need some creative problem solving. You will have sellers that you can't just go to a house now. Any property you go to now, you can't just go and do a traditional CMA and say, okay, this is what your house is worth. If you are selling real estate in Washington State today, and it is in an area where a property owner could build or where these house bills, for example, apply, you don't really have to do 2 CMAs. You really do. You have to do a CMA that pertains to if you're to just sell the property as is and we weren't to consider what the potential is, this is where the CMA would end up. However, if you were to perhaps add an ADU, this is potentially where that sale could be. Now, you're also not a builder, you are not a developer, and you have to be very careful to stay. You can't just sit down and say, oh, you could probably build something for 300 a foot because I know someone else who did. Why this is so important is because many times when I have sat down with a seller and said to them, or a homeowner, or a friend of mine who's asking for themselves, and they've said, hey, I've got a lot, or hey, I've had agents ask me, I've got a client that has a lot, and these new house bills really are going to affect their value. And I've sat down and tried to explain to them and show them, well, maybe not. Maybe it's better that they just sell the property as is because there are some barriers that go with this lot. And the barriers could be all kinds of things. So these are the things that you're going to have to get to understand and know. Now, I have spent, as I've said, hundreds, thousands of hours on this topic. I don't expect you to know all of this. What my goal is today is for you to be aware of this incredible opportunity that's out there right now for you to advance your educational information to be able to then translate that into something that will bring you in extra transactions. And I will tell you something as simple as adding into your marketing that you are trained in this or an expert in this or you know about this is very helpful. We've had a number of our clients that have taken our training on this that have said to us this has been extremely valuable because when I go to a home now, I know what I'm looking for. So when people say to me, you know, how relevant is this? In this market today, it's extremely relevant. Now, let's look about what actually defines an ADU. What is it? So first of all, I have many times heard someone say something like, oh, we've got a space that we think is an ADU, or hey, we've got this little shed out in the backyard, and hey, our nephew's been living it for the last 2 years, and yeah, it's good to go. That's a DADU. Well, it's actually not. If it has not been, you have to have it permitted. You have to have, it has to match the legal definition in your local area, not a legal definition from an area, but what does your local jurisdiction and area, how does that area define what makes it legal? Now, there have been times where I have said to agents, this is a great property and it's got a DADU in the backyard. It's not legal yet. It hasn't been permitted. It's just something that was built on the property 15 years ago, but the bones are really good. Would it be a benefit for the seller to actually get that legal, make it legal? And oftentimes the answer is absolutely, especially in an area where they could be rented out, because now you are selling not just the primary residence or a home, you are selling a property that also has some rental income potential on it. The other thing is that how we look at when something is listed on the MLS. I cannot tell you how many times I have looked at the MLS and it has said ADU. Go and search. When you finish today, you go and search, look up ADUs or DADUs, and you're going to be shocked at what isn't legal, what they're terming is legal, but it's really not. So also, if you're going to market a legal unit on the MLS, utilize the MLS's areas in which to do that. Make sure you provide all the information in the documentation. And I will tell you that there are people out there that search specifically for legal ADUs and they know what they're looking for. And if you can provide it, again, that gives you that edge. The other thing that's super important is appraisals. I will tell you that in our middle housing course that we did, we actually interviewed an appraiser. And oh my goodness, that video alone was mind opening to me on all of the things that appraisers have to consider now because of these two new house bills. So why this all matters is because it matters to your sellers. It matters to their bottom line. It matters to how you market the property. It matters to how much time you spend on this. If I am sitting down with a seller and a seller says to me, well, look at this great big beautiful lot I've got, and I think I want to build an ADU, or I think I want to, build a DADU in the backyard. The problem is most sellers, most of the time, are not in a position to handle a full-on build project. And especially when the seller says, yeah, I think I want to just tackle this on my own. Can you help me? Real estate agents are notorious for saying, oh, of course I can help you. But you have to know legally as an agent, you are not a builder, not a developer. You are not trained in utilities. You are not trained in all of the things that go into building or adding onto a property. What you can say is this property, because it does have space to put a DADU and a good sized DADU, that there are builders and developers out there right now that would be very interested, or small builders that would be interested in picking up a property like yours. So let's add value for that land. But stop trying to add value for a build that's not there, and do not start estimating what it's going to cost to build, because you don't know. Okay, very important. Now, let's talk about valuing a property with an ADU. This is one of the most difficult things to do, is to figure out, how the heck do I value a property with an ADU? And by the way, I have seen in some places where actually properties that have ADUs are not actually even getting more than other properties that don't. It depends on the area, it depends on the condition, depends on the property, it depends on so many things. But valuing a property that has an ADU is a very complex step. Part of the problem is there aren't comps. It's really hard to find not only other properties that have got an ADU on them, but it's really hard to find properties where the comps are similar, right? Because again, are you looking at something that you've got to look at a number of things? You got to look at the primary residence. Does this comp, is this similar? The ADU, okay, what would this be like? So sometimes you have to separate it in order to get the data. Sometimes I'm going like, there isn't enough comps out there that have got, or any comps that have got a primary property with an ADU, and I'm sitting in front of a seller that's built their ADU and they want to know what it's worth. And sometimes you have to go and separate these out, and it's like reverse engineering it. Also, is it an ADU or is it just extra space? I have people all the time. I remember when a client of mine called me a few months ago and said, okay, I need to value this. I'm having a really hard time valuing it. And I'm like, okay, tell me what you're trying to value. She was trying to value a property with an ADU. And I said to her, where's the ADU? And she showed me an extra room off the back porch that the seller had framed in 5 years earlier, and they had used it literally for a cold storage room. They then decided to turn it into an ADU. It wasn't legal. It wasn't permitted. It wasn't even the right location. It didn't have the right egress, ingress. It was not legal. So you have to also know, if something's legal and something's permitted, there will be a record for it, and you will be able to find that. The other thing you have to do is you have to incorporate the income potential, or is it even documented income? Like, you have to remember, I know for me as an investor, when someone says to me that, oh, it's an income producing property, I want to see the numbers. Show me, right? And also, how does this impact value? Or how does it open up the buyer pool? Because the buyer pool is opened up for people that want to buy properties, but they need that rental income in order to qualify, to be able to utilize that, to qualify in that higher price point. So all those things become extremely important. Now, condoization. What in the world is condoization? Now, condoization, by the way, can be extremely beneficial. There's some challenges with it. So when we think about what is the definition of condoization, condoization, really, to make it simple, is the legal process of just dividing a property into separate, legally independent units that can be sold and owned independently. Okay, now this is an excellent way for property owners to increase value. And the reason for that is people love having their own space, their own, they want their own legal space. Now, the challenge is that you have to remember that there's a process to condoization. So why some sellers don't, because you might think of, well, why wouldn't everybody? Well, it's called money. It's called a process. You have to hire an attorney. You can't just do this yourself. Now, is there somebody out there that has done their own condoization? Sure, they are. Sure, there have been, and they are probably very well educated and they understand the process. When it comes to anything legal to do with any piece of real property, Denise's rule of thumb is stay out of the legal lane, Denise. That's why you have experts. I have an attorney that I think is phenomenal, one of the best in the state of Washington who specializes in condoization. That's who I call. If I've got a question, I call him. If I have a crazy thought, I call him. If I'm wondering, I call him. I do not guess when it comes to condoization. Here's why. First of all, a good condoization attorney is going to do a couple of things. First of all, they have to draft an entire declaration. They have to draft the condominium declaration. They have to create what is called a condominium map. They have to establish a homeowners association. Do you really want to be establishing a homeowners association? Do you really want to have to register that with the state? Do you really want to have to do the tracking of that and handle the minutes and do all of that you're going to have when you have you need to get an expert that is going to take care of that for you. So that's really important. The other thing is when you think about why condoization is so incredible is because it does allow, I have noticed in the marketplace, condoized units, they're pushing the prices upward. Okay. Very, very, very important. So the process of doing it, I've talked about it a little bit. I'm going to give you, for those that are the do-it-yourselfers that like to, that just want to know the steps involved, I will tell you. You have to understand HOA law. You have to understand condominium declaration law. You have to understand how a condominium map is drawn up. So once again, those are more reasons to do it. Now, the downside for a home buyer is that, sometimes I will find that, home buyers don't like rules, regulations, and the minute that you add anything that includes any type of regulation, home buyers don't like that. So remember, it's a condoized unit. Condoized units have regulation that buyers may not like. Now, valuing a property now with middle housing potential. Okay, so let's talk about that a little bit. So the first thing you have to do is you have to actually even look at and determine whether or not this property has the potential. Now, where are you going to get that information? Well, first of all, the information is there. It is there in your local planning department. It is there in your local, you can look and find out in your area what laws have been implemented. But determining the value for a potential lot that is going to have middle housing on it, you kind of have to reverse engineer it. And what I do is I reverse engineer the land and the land's value by looking at what's the potential of the final product. I'm going to give you a great example. An agent comes to me a few months ago and says, okay, look at, here's a piece of land and the potential for this piece of land is to build 4 units on it. And we're going to sell the land at X price. Okay. And I'm going to give easy numbers for you. Okay. Let's imagine that you have a piece of land and your seller says to you, oh, this is a great piece of land. We can build, I want $1 million for this piece of land. Okay, well, hang on a second. $1 million for the piece of land that you can do 4 units on means that, we're just going to reverse engineer this, means that each lot value or land value for each of those units is going to be $250,000. You could even see whether or not, and remember, land value in most areas is really only, let's even say rough numbers, we'll use 25% of the end value. And I'm using easy numbers for these purposes only, absolutely not for your area, because I know areas where lot values are 100,000. I know areas where lot values are 1 million. But let's imagine that seller looks at you and says, I think this piece of land is worth $1 million, and I think someone's going to come in here and put 4 units, and the land value in each is 250,000. Well, then we would say, if we're using the 25% ratio and say 25% of a property's final selling price is caught up in the cost of the land at 25%, then what we're saying is each of those units is $1 million. All you have to do is reverse engineer and know that's not even possible. In this area right now, these units are selling for no more than 600,000. So now you're reverse engineering going, these lots can't sell for any more than 150, which means this land's not worth $1 million. It's worth about 600,000. And you're going to have to learn in your area, what are the traditional lot values roughly, not for a lot, but for a lot that's got 4 houses on it or 2 units on it or a 6-plex on it. So whenever I'm having trouble I reverse engineer. And then that requires me to do land research. I'm going to have to help determine, what is the cost of land here? And what is the traditionally, what are we looking at? What have previous pieces of land sold for? The other thing is that don't just think that that's the end of it, because what happens if, let's imagine that you're going to sell the land. Oftentimes, why I love buying land in this manner is because an agent and a seller have defined the land value as that 150 and it's on the market for 600. I look at it and go, if I do a nicer product, I can get 699 out of each unit. And now I'm getting $400,000 more profit because I'm getting, or pardon me, 396,000 because I'm getting $99,000 more, right? So the per unit. And that's where oftentimes how I determine whether or not I'm going to buy land is based on what's the final and can we push the price if we do a nicer product. Many times I've said to builders, in my builder consulting work, I've said to them, you know what? If you buy this piece of land and you just build what you've always built, you're just going to buy that land at 150 and you're going to build that end product at 600,000. Okay, you can do that. But why don't you jump out of your comfort zone and why don't you upgrade the finishes? Why don't you do a better, more open floor plan? Why don't you increase the ceiling height? Why don't you add a little bit more and then up the price? Many times that is exactly what it takes. So again, you got to review the market. You got to know the market conditions. And this is where when you start learning about these two new laws and how they apply to every part of your business, it's going to open up just a wealth of ideas. In fact, in my course that I have, I literally go into how to design them. What sells? What do people want? What colors do you use? Because really, small product, when you're building smaller product, your window format has to be different. Your color format has to be different. Your ceiling height, your roof lines, everything has to be optimized to create the greatest visual spaces possible. So again, the more you learn about this, the more that you don't have to be an expert to be able to say to an expert in building, to be able to say to one of your seller clients, let me show you a few ADUs that I've toured that were beautiful. And look what they did over here. And look at and this is where you should be creating a catalog. Every time you go and tour a property, I want you to go back and print off, just so you got a catalog of it, quick photos that you can show them and be able to have that MLS number to refer back to quickly. But you need to do your due diligence here. Now, this is critical, okay? This is critical. Marketing a property with an ADU. Oh my goodness, I am absolutely shocked at the lack of knowledge out there about how to correctly market a property with an ADU. Do you know how many documents aren't listed and are not posted that need to be or not included in the documents? Do you know how many times I will stumble upon something and go, this is a legal ADU and they're selling this property as just single family. They're not even capturing this. Okay, so you've got to make the buyer pool as full as possible. And you make the buyer pool full by utilizing every single MLS feature that's out there. You do that by making sure that you include as many supplements as you possibly can. Also, any additional visual aids that you can do. Photography, 3D tours, virtual staging if you need to, proper signage, really educating the buyer. If you are marketing a property where the seller has gone to all the trouble of getting this legal, include as much of the legal paperwork so they can see, okay, it's here, it's legal, right? Super important. Okay, number 3, marketing a property with middle housing potential and dealing with developers. This is probably one of the biggest areas of weakness that I see for agents. Now, if a builder wants to buy a lot or a developer wants to buy a lot in order to do something with it, okay, what do they want? They want information. They want detail. They want numbers. Stop spending all your time describing how pretty the lot is and spend your time really focusing as much as you can on the detail. So as a developer, builder, here's what I want to know. I want to know everything you know about any conversations you've had down at your city or your county. I want to know if you know anything about where the utility lines are. I want to know if you've had any discussions about utility lines with the city or the county. I want to know whether or not you have done anything on the property. Have you actually improved the property at all? I want to know if there are any trees on the property, and in fact, whether or not the trees that are on your property, whether they have been sized for to see whether or not they meet within the tree canopy regulation in your area to be okay, or whether or not, oh, you can build here, however, you can build up to this point. Have you done that due diligence? And that's something that the owner needs to do, but they're probably not going to know about doing it. So those are things when I'm talking to a seller where I will say, they'll say to me, hey, don't you love my lot? I say, I love your lot. But there's a lot of questions that we have to have answered before I can value. Stop going in and giving people an instant value. You've got to also do some homework. If you want to do this and get into this and really have value to the sellers, it's important that you put your boots on and you get down to the planning department. It's important that you talk with people in permitting. It's important that you understand what your tree regulations are in your area, because that is going to affect things. You should know what the setbacks are in your area so that if you're selling something, you can include the setback regulations right in the documentation, because builders and developers will go and they will look at things that their agents send them. And if they don't have that detail, they just simply bypass it because they do not have the time. Any kind of documentation allows them to say, okay, this one is worth giving a set. I'm going to shortlist this one. Once there's a pile of shortlist items or lots, then they're going to be like, okay, this one is worth me having a conversation down at the city or the county. So that's why it's so important that you pay attention to this. The other thing is you have to think about, how can I build value for a potential developer? How can I reduce risk for them? And I'm going to tell you exactly how you do that. I'll tell you how I do it. If I have a lot, and let's imagine that Sean is my seller, and I go to her home and I'm like, wow, this property is perfect for 4 duplexes. What I'm going to do when I list that property is I will have already done the research to show a builder or developer there are other properties in this area that they put duplexes on them, or they've got fourplexes, or whatever the configuration is, and they are selling at this price. And here's some information about that. Let them know what you know. Also, let them know anything that you know in terms of, I've already been down to the city. This is what we've checked out. We, in fact, got a letter. Here's a letter I'd like to include. Don't just go down to the city or the county and ask questions at the counter. Actually say to them, I just need something in writing. And they'll say, great, I'll send you an email, and it has all our specs on it and it has all our regulations. Great, now include that. That's what developers and builders want. You have to also help the seller understand that they don't control what happens to their home once they sell it. I've had many sellers over the years say to me, I am not selling this home to a builder or developer. And then I say, okay, I want to challenge this thought a little bit, Shauna, because if you sell the home as is, and you choose that buyer that's going to buy it as a single family home right now is worth about $1.5 million. However, if we were to market it as a property that we could put a sixplex on, actually the value I would be listing it at would be 1.8 million. So there's a $300,000 difference. So you just have to decide, can you get over that concern for 300,000? And I recommend doing that by just not driving by the property, because I relate with you. And I do, you guys. I had a situation with my parents' property where I wanted to renovate it and develop it. And then at the end of the day, my parents decided to sell it. I have never driven by my home I grew up in, because I would cry. It would break my heart. However, I'll cry into my pile of $300,000 bills, right? So that's where you have to understand that this is normal for sellers, that there is that emotion. Okay. Now, how does middle housing impact appraisals? Oh my goodness. Well, didn't I have such a great enlightening experience to watch the interview that we did for our course, and where we spent a great deal of time. In fact, Shauna did the interview with the appraisal. It was fascinating listening to her talk about the things that they have to alter and change and consider. It was incredible. Even just that bit of information is extremely, extremely powerful. Because the one thing you have to think about is that they have now the new difficult task of having to change their process, right? So now they have to look at things like, are there comps or are there not comps? What about what's going on in the neighborhood in terms of the middle housing building potential? And how is that going to make their job more complex? And what happens if they're appraising something? And yes, it's middle housing, but it's not even consistent with what's been built in the area. So then they have to devalue for that. And how do we do that? Because the one thing I will tell you, the best piece of advice I have for anybody, any buyer, any seller, anybody who's either going to buy middle housing or sell a lot with middle housing or build middle housing, what they have to realize is that the neighborhood is extremely important and what you do based on the neighborhood. I have had builders say to me, well, this is just the formula I use. And I will say to them, if you build that DADU in that style, in that neighborhood, you're not going to sell. You have a problem. You also have to make sure that, let's imagine you have an older home and then you want to build this new DADU in the backyard. That's fine, but you cannot just get a budget and bids for the DADU. You have to have a bid for making sure that there is that complementary congruent style, which means that even if something's older, how do we make them look like they are, it's the same thought. Sometimes that's with color. Sometimes that's with making, yes, you may want a flat roof, but you're in a pitched roof craftsman neighborhood. It's not going to work. It's going to look like a shed. So sorry, get over the fact that you're addicted to flat roofs. You're going to have to live with a pitched roof on this build, right? So that's where making sure that there is continuity, neighborhood continuity, style continuity, house continuity. That's what makes these homes really, these properties really valuable. And I know you've seen them where you see these beautiful homes, and then there's this cute little, almost like a mini version of it. It's the same feel. And that's where it's like, wow, this is so, it feels so right. And that's where I also warn builders, developers, homeowners, buyers, pay attention to making sure that it's complementary. So think about that continuity, congruent, complementary, the three C's of making sure you build the right thing. Okay, number one, how do you stay out of legal hot water? Well, first of all, don't go near it. I have very strong rules. When I talk to anybody about building, I will say, I'm a builder, but unless I'm a builder, I may have some knowledge about how the build process works, but it doesn't matter about my knowledge. Every time you have a new lot, a new situation, a new property that has a house on it, and you're going to add, let's say you're going to add, I'm not talking about scrap lot, I'm talking about a house that maybe you're adding an attached unit to it. What's really critical is that you got to be very careful. Don't give bids, don't give estimates, don't say stupid things. Say, I don't know. We'll have to find out. It's not my area of specialty. I need to bring the city in to talk about utilities. I need to bring a contractor in to talk utilities, and we need to get the two pros talking. Then from there, what I can do is I can assist, but that's not my expertise. The thing that people tend not to do is to verify. You need to verify everything. You need to verify because oftentimes what will happen is, this is a classic one you're going to hear. Oh yeah, I've got a legal DADU in the backyard. I need you to price it for that. And you need to say, well, how do you know it's legal? Do you have a permit for it? Does it comply to everything? Do you have something in writing saying that there's been inspection to make sure it complies? If you are not sure, then you as the agent need to go down and talk to the planning department and say, here's what I've got. Here's the address. Here's the house. Do you have any permit on record for that DADU? No, we do not. Okay. What would it take in order to make it legal? Right? And remember, if you don't know something, stop talking about it. I say all the time, I don't know, but let me do some research. I don't know, let me find out for you. I don't know, I'm going to check with the city. I don't know, I got to check with permitting. I don't know, I got to check with Public Works. I don't know is your best friend with these new laws. Because now, if you say to me, what is the law? I could say, in Whatcom County, this is what you're allowed to do. In Kirkland, this is what you're allowed to do. In Seattle, this is what you're allowed to do, right? Every different in Blaine, Washington, this is what you're allowed to do. But depending on where you are, things will change. And don't assume because it's one way in one area that is one way everywhere, because it will not. Also, on everything, the buyer has to verify. That's extremely, extremely important. Okay, I want to give you an example. Okay, let's imagine that you go to a home and the seller says, "Hey, I need you to list this property and I want you to list it as soon as possible. We are ready to go. And by the way, just so you know, I've got a couple things going on here. I got a DADU. Oh my God, people are going to love that. They can maybe have extra income from that, maybe more family members. Look at all the problems it's going to solve." Okay. And that's what the seller says to you. "Oh, and by the way, we've got guest quarters. And oh, the DADU is being rented out and I get $3,200 a month rent for that." So first of all, where do you start? I always start first with anything that I'm concerned may not be permitted. Okay. Now, a guest quarters, which could be a room where people sleep or guests sleep, is not an ADU. Not unless it has been designed and it has been permitted through your local jurisdiction. It has to follow certain regulations. So I would say to, let's say the seller was Shauna, "Shauna, tell me about the guest quarters, because you mentioned you had two areas in your property that you may be able to rent out. So the first one is the DADU. We'll talk about that in a moment, because that actually getting income for that 3,200. But you're saying that the guest quarters you think has potential to rent out for 1,100. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So have you rented it out before?
No, I have a friend who rents out her like guest quarters as well,
Okay.
and she's getting 1,100 for hers. So that's why I'm thinking I could get the same thing.
So is it permitted to be rented out?
Um, I don't know.
Okay.
I'm
So
not
that's
my I don't have a permit to rent out
okay.
my guest
We got to
quarters.
find that out, because the other thing too is, depending on the neighborhood of where it is, do you guys know that in some areas, in some neighborhoods, having a DADU and then just renting a bunch of rooms out may not be legal. You need to understand in your area what you can do. So that's the first place I start, was inquiring. So she doesn't know. Shauna, let me do a little bit of due diligence for you. I need to find that out first. Okay. Now tell me about the DADU. You're renting that out for 3,200 a month. It's
I know.
fantastic. Now, was that permitted?
Uh, you mean was it permitted to build it?
Yes.
Oh, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. We actually bought it with it, so I don't know.
Okay, that's really important. Let me tell you why. Because there's two types of DADUs. Okay. One that has been permitted, follows all the local regulations and jurisdictions within that area,
Mhm.
and one that we can market with all of that documentation.
Okay.
Then there is the type that we're marketing without documentation. The challenge there is that definitely changes the perceived value from the buyer, and that can affect price. So here's what I would like to do. Today, I want to go and tour all the spaces. And then what I'd like to do is I need to do some due diligence for you. I'm going to go and talk to the planning department if you're comfortable with me doing that.
Yeah.
Okay, that's where I start. I can't give a price on this property yet. And if she said to me, "I need it as soon as possible." And let's say she pushes me and says, "Well, no, give me a rough idea now." I can't. John, I can't. I could potentially be devaluing your property. I would never do that. So I need to find out where we're at. I also would like to find out for you if the DADU is not permitted. And just from driving up, it looks like it was really nicely done. Whoever did it looks good. But again, I'm not an inspector. It would be good to also, if it wasn't a legal DADU, I'd like to find out what would it take to potentially get it legal so we can open up that buyer pool, right? Because again, when something is legal and permitted, you're going to open up the buyer pool. That's where you start, you guys. That's extremely important where you start. Now, here's another great one. You're called to list this property in a mid-sized city. It's got a 10,260 square foot lot. Where do you even start? Okay, well, first and foremost, even if you look at this picture, there is a number of interesting clues. And don't get so excited so quickly and think, "Oh, we're just going to tear that thing down and away we go." This house was initially built way back when really, really, really close to that property line. I don't know too many properties right now that don't have setback requirements. So this is a red flag to me, something that I need to look into. The other thing is that's a pretty big tree right there. And I need to find out, is that going to impede potentially what we could do? Now, this could be a situation where this house could be sold beautifully for someone who wants to buy it and renovate it. This is a property that could be, depending on the lots and what you could do here, a lot that you could do something on and have multiple units. And therefore, okay, depending on the neighborhood, what could it sell for? Again, you got to kind of reverse engineer in the area to go, what's the highest and best use of this property? And once again, you got to find out, if this isn't going to be looking at the lot line, how close the house is to the lot line, and looking that it's probably a pretty narrow lot. The problem with lots that are really narrow is access. So don't get so excited and think, oh, I can just build a bunch of stuff on there. Just before you get excited on any lot, do a little bit of due diligence, and you will help get your clients from this idea of I'm going to be a land baron and oh my goodness, I've got this ugly little house and I'm a land baron because we can stick 6 things on it. Can't stick anything where there's not room to put it and where there isn't access, because the thing is remember, the more units you have, the more access you need to have. So that's another thing as well. Sometimes I've looked at properties and said you could squeeze 3 things in here, but boy, from a market perspective, I don't know the market's going to like that. I think you're better off to renovate this house, make it absolutely fabulous, beautiful, put a matching little cottage, in the backyard, nice little DADU, and sell it to someone who would love this as a family compound or a compound for themselves and maybe a family member or a parent or something or a child. So again, it just really depends. And I know we have to be careful how we market all these things, but I'm saying from my perspective, when I'm looking at this, I'm always looking at highest and best use. Super important. Okay. So in summary, you got to know this stuff. It's here right now. There are so many opportunities. Now, before I learned everything I possibly could about middle housing laws, I didn't know anything about it. And yes, it's taken me a couple of years to feel really confident, but boy, it really is shocking to me how many times I've even been out at social events and people are talking about middle housing. It's incredible. It comes up. And the more you know about something, the more confident you are. And then you feel good and confident to be able to say, you know what? Hey, I've come across this in my real estate. I'd love to share a couple of thoughts or ideas. Open the door up for conversation. So this is going to remain one of the biggest opportunities we're going to see. But the opportunity is here now. Don't wait 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. So really do your due diligence and learn as much as you can, because that provides clients that you're working with just that extra level of concierge care.
Absolutely. And as we shared, this information today really only scratched the surface. Each one of these topics and many more are really a course in and of themselves. We've invested a lot of time in developing a robust set of courses and information designed to help you learn all of these details. Those are all housed in the Middle Housing Resource Center at middlehousinghelp.com, and that's where you can get all the middle housing and ADU information that you need. With our Middle Housing Resource Center full access product, you actually receive all of the training. My gosh, on that next slide, we've got all the information. We've got 21 courses, calculators, checklists, and more available in this product. So if you need to learn about valuing a property with an ADU at 11 o'clock at night, because that's probably going to happen, it's in there. If you want to learn about what appraisers are thinking about middle housing or how condoization works, it's in there. And what about a checklist on marketing an ADU or a middle housing development calculator? My gosh, they're in there too. And now, because you've spent an hour with us, we're giving you 40% off our full access product with the code full access 40. You can also look at the QR code right there, and that is right under the courses. You can look for that there. And then we also have a selection of our 13 of our 21 courses available. You can check out the store for our full list. And then finally, we've also got a newsletter that we put out each and every week that includes your questions about ADUs and middle housing, plus local updates because things are changing all the time. Actually, in our newsletter last week, we just included information about middle housing that's coming to Coopeville, Washington. Yes, Coopeville, Washington. The newsletter is free. You can sign up and have that arrive in your inbox each and every week. I really encourage you to do that also. Here's the information for the signing up. And now that we're talking about Q&A, because that is something we cover each week in our newsletter, Denise, I've got 3 questions for you. If you can skip to that last slide,
Yeah,
I'll go ahead and ask you those if you are ready.
I'm ready. Let's
Okay.
do it.
Okay, Denise, you talk a lot about doing research before listing a property with an ADU or middle housing potential, and it sounds like a big list of additional research to do. Permits, talking with the building department, etc. Is it worth to all this extra work? How do you keep track of what you need to do and who to call? Everything.
Well, first of all, what I recommend that everybody does is have just a little binder. Okay, just put a little binder together.
I like
Okay, and what I like to do is, so for example, depending on where you're at, I'll use Whatcom County. In
it.
Whatcom County, we have different little cities and we have different areas. So in Whatcom County, for example, I want to know what's the city of Blaine doing? What's Ferndale doing? What's Bellingham doing? What's Linden doing? And what I do is I will go down to those planning departments or I will go online. I will get all their information and it's always with me right here. So start to collect the data and keep it in one spot. You don't have to necessarily even read all the data right now. What I want you to do is start by collecting it and putting it in here. And then you'll also start, what I also like to do is go through and go, okay, how did the different counties or cities compare? Because a lot of them will have some similarities that they borrow from each other, but then they'll be like, oh yeah, most of the time we can do that. But if you're going to be building something in the city of Blaine, City of Blaine does allow this or doesn't. Where are they a little bit more lenient or where are they a little bit more strict? And I just color code everything. I color code leniency as green is good. Yay. They don't care so much about that. But there are some places that have tree canopy regulations that are very strict. And I highlight that red. And then I know already from my learning, every seller I go to talk to, if I walk in that property and I'm seeing big trees everywhere, we have an issue.
Yeah. Excellent. Okay. Question number 2. You mentioned staying out of legal hot water. Do you have an example of how agents are getting themselves into legal hot water? I do recall a specific example that you've shared that's a pretty interesting one
I
about
have
development.
so many. I have so many. Okay, here's a good one. Here's a class. Well, I'll share a couple. Classic one is agent is called to evaluate a property for an estate. And they value the property and they say, oh, yep, great. This property's worth $650,000. Look at the house. House is in bad condition. House is terrible, et cetera, et cetera. Someone's going to buy this too. They're going to tear the house down and build something new. Okay. That agent failed to understand really what could be put on that property. And now imagine, for example, I've had two estate examples actually. But basically in the one example, property could have sold at 650. However, the property could have sold at 900 if it was sold with the right documentation because it had the ability to put 6 units on it. And 6 units at the 900,000, they were looking at that at about 150,000 a unit because those units were easily selling for that 600 and above number. And had that transaction gone through, that seller could have at some point come back and said, wait a minute, the neighbor down the street just sold their they have a raw piece of land with a house that they demolished last year. It had no house in it, sold for 900. Mine had a house, albeit it was going to be torn down for 650. What happened? You can get yourself in legal hot water if you are valuing a property and you miss that there is potential for any development. The minute that the zoning changes in any area and allows for upzoning, change to zoning, increased density, increased any of that, you are no longer just selling a home, a lot. You're selling development property. And that's where you could get yourself in a lot of hot water.
Great
example. Another example. You go into a property and you say, hey, Shauna, oh, this is great. I love your property. Yeah, let's sell it. Fantastic. We're going to sell this. And But in order to sell it, you know what I think, Shauna? I think you should add the DADU beforehand. And hey, listen, I know a builder friend of mine. He's building at about 300 a foot. You want to build a 100,000 square foot unit back here. That's going to cost you 300,000. And boy, by the time you get this finished, I can sell this for another 800,000. And at the end of the day, it didn't cost 300 to build, it cost 500 to build. And at the end of the day, they didn't get an extra 800, they got an extra 400, so the seller is negative 100,000. That's a problem.
Yeah.
Don't be an expert if you're not in that area, in that arena.
Excellent. Okay. So finally, Denise, if you were an agent right now facing these changes in the industry in Washington, what would you do?
I would be, you have to get educated. You actually don't have a choice. I think that every brokerage in Washington State very soon will have to face this issue. I think every agent is going to have to face it because you are leaving too much opportunity on the table and you're opening yourself up to too much legal liability. I love to be able to talk about this because I'm able to say, Shauna, your home is in the city of Blaine. Here's what you can do. Here's what you can't do. Shauna, your home is in Kirkland, Washington. Here's what you can do. Here's what you can't do. If you do these things, based on market stats, here's how I would comp this out. If you don't and did this, this is where I would comp it out. You having that really clear diagnostic, it's crystal clear. It's a diagnostic. Your cities, your counties, your areas, they already have a diagnostic. Here is exactly what you need to do. You've got to learn that. And then you have to learn how to translate that to your clients. Super important.
Okay, thank you for joining us today, and thank you, Denise, for all the great information. We hope to see you over at the Middle Housing Resource Center and that you become a strong middle housing advocate for your clients and for our industry. Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.